A mafia boss's son hadn't spoken in 2 years. Every specialist, every nanny, every expert gave up and walked away. Then a new maid sat on the floor beside him and did what no one else thought to do. Nothing. What she didn't know, that silent little boy was about to change her life just as much as she changed his. The last maid lasted 4 days. The one before her made it to 6. The one before that, a retired school teacher who had raised 5 children and claimed she had seen everything, packed her bag on day 2 and left without asking for her pay. Nobody blamed them. Emily Carter knew all of this before she rang the bell. She had read the job listing 3 times, noticed what it didn't say, and took the position anyway. $23 an hour, live-in, full benefits. The address was in the kind of neighborhood where the houses sat behind walls and the walls sat behind silence. She rang the bell at 8 in the morning with 1 suitcase and no backup plan. The gate opened before she could ring it a second time. A man in a dark jacket walked her to the front door without introducing himself. Inside, the head housekeeper, a woman named Glenda with tired eyes and a clipboard, gave her a 4-minute orientation that covered the kitchen schedule, the laundry rules, and the location of the linen closet. Then Glenda stopped walking, turned around, and looked at Emily the way you look at someone before you tell them something they probably won't want to hear. "The boys," she said. "I have to tell you about the boys. Twins, 10 years old. Ethan and Noah." Ethan was easy, loud and fast, and constantly moving. The kind of kid who turned every hallway into a racetrack. He would talk to anyone who stood still long enough. Noah hadn't said a word in 2 years. Not since the night of the attack. Someone had come for the family. The details stayed locked behind closed doors and tight lips, but Noah had seen something that night that nobody could undo. 3 specialists, 2 grief counselors, a child psychiatrist who drove in from New York twice a month. None of it reached him. He lived in the house like a ghost who had forgotten how to leave. Emily nodded through all of it. Glenda looked at her the way everyone looks at the new person who says they understand, like she was already counting down the days. By evening, Emily had found her footing in the kitchen and met Ethan twice. Once when he slid down the banister directly in front of her, and once when he appeared in the pantry and asked if she knew how to make cereal with chocolate milk. She said yes. He said she was probably the best maid they'd ever had. She met Noah only for a moment. He was standing in the upstairs hallway near the window, looking out at the gray sky. She stopped in the doorway, didn't say his name, didn't try to get his attention. She just looked at him for a second and kept moving. He turned and watched her go. She didn't see that part. The storm that rolled in after dinner was the kind Chicago does in late October. No warning, just a sudden pressure change, and then the sky cracking open. Thunder hit the dining room windows like a fist. Noah's chair flew back. He was under the table before anyone processed what was happening, arms locked around his knees, back pressed against the table leg. The sound coming from him wasn't crying. It was the specific silence of a person trying to disappear. 2 security guards moved toward him immediately. That was the instinct. Close in, cover, protect. The moment Noah heard their footsteps, his whole body pulled tighter. "Stop!" Michael Brennan's voice came from the head of the table. Low and absolute. Both men froze. Michael Brennan at the head of his own dinner table looked exactly like what he was. A man who had built something powerful out of terrible material and carried the weight of it in his jaw. He looked at his son under the table, and for one unguarded second, he looked completely lost. Glenda tried next. Water, soft voice, crouched down at the edge of the tablecloth. Noah pressed his face into his knees. Emily was standing near the kitchen door. She had been in this house for 11 hours. She walked to the sideboard, picked up the ceramic bowl that held the sugar packets for the coffee service, walked to the rug beside the table, and sat down on the floor. Not under the table, not reaching toward him, just on the floor, a few feet away, at his eye level. She pulled out a sugar packet and folded it into thirds, stood it upright on the rug. Then another, then another. Nobody in the room said anything. The thunder moved further east. Emily kept building. She didn't look at Noah. She didn't need to. She just kept stacking packets into a small, unsteady tower with the concentration of someone doing the most important thing in the world. A hand appeared at the edge of her vision. Small fingers. Careful. Noah picked up a sugar packet and placed it on top of her tower without a word. It stood for 3 full seconds before it fell. Emily started building again. Noah helped. At the head of the table, Michael Brennan watched his son's shoulders drop from around his ears for the first time in 2 years. He didn't say a word. He just watched, and something behind his eyes shifted into a question he didn't yet know how to ask. By the third morning, Emily had learned something that no file or specialist report had ever captured. Noah wasn't broken. He was just speaking a language nobody had bothered to learn. She figured it out early on day 2, before the house fully woke up. She had been carrying fresh towels down the upstairs hallway when she noticed him, crouched beside the windowsill, carefully arranging his toy cars in a line. Red ones first, then silver, then the dark blue ones with the small chrome wheels that he handled like they were made of something fragile. He worked slowly and deliberately, adjusting each car by tiny degrees until the line satisfied some internal standard only he could measure. Emily watched him for exactly as long as it took to understand what she was seeing. Then she walked past without a word and let him finish. That afternoon, one of the junior housekeepers moved the cars to dust the windowsill. Emily came around the corner just in time to see Noah standing at the end of the hallway, staring at the disrupted line with an expression so completely still it was worse than any reaction would have been. She handed the housekeeper a different task, moved the sill back into place, and kept walking. She didn't tell Noah. She didn't want credit for it. She just needed the line to be there. The tapping she understood by day 3. 3 slow knocks of his knuckle against whatever surface was nearby. The kitchen counter, the arm of the sofa, the edge of the dinner table, meant he was processing something. Working through it. Manageable. The fast, uneven rhythm meant something different. That one meant she needed to quietly put herself between him and whatever was escalating before it reached the point of no return. She never drew attention to it. She never named it out loud. She just adjusted her position in the room and waited. What she was learning, piece by piece, was the shape of his world. And his world had rules. Not the kind that needed to be enforced, the kind that needed to be respected. The problem by day 3 had a name, and that name was Ethan. He had been watching. Emily had caught him twice on the landing, looking down at her and Noah in the hallway below with an expression she recognized immediately because she had seen it before. On younger siblings, on kids in waiting rooms, on anyone who had learned that the best way to become invisible was to be the one who wasn't struggling. Ethan had spent 2 years being the easy one, the manageable one, the boy who was fine so that all the attention could go where it was needed. Being fine is its own kind of loneliness. She didn't have a plan yet for how to fix it. She filed it away and kept moving. The school pickup that afternoon changed her timeline. Michael's driver collected the twins from their private school at 3 o'clock. Emily came along for the transition. Noah sometimes struggled with the noise of the hallways at dismissal, and a familiar face at the car helped. She had only been there 3 days, but apparently that was already enough to count as familiar. That said something about how long it had been since anyone stayed. She was waiting by the car when she heard the teacher's voice down the corridor, sharp, tight. The specific tone of an adult trying to stay professional while being genuinely upset. She followed it around the corner and found a long hallway mural with a thick streak of crayon dragged hard across one of its painted panels. Blue over blue, ruining a careful lake scene that had probably taken someone a long weekend to finish. Ethan was standing 2 feet away with his hands at his sides. He didn't deny it. He didn't make up a story. He just stood there and took what came next, which was a phone call to his father, and then the particular silence of a car ride home with a parent who didn't yell, but whose quiet was somehow louder than yelling. Noah sat beside his brother the entire drive and didn't look out the window once. He kept his eyes on Ethan's profile. Emily watched him watching and understood that whatever distance lived between the twins right now, it was not the same as not caring. Dinner that night was quiet in the way the mansion was often quiet. Not peaceful, just held. Michael said nothing about the mural at the table. He didn't need to. The conversation he'd had with Ethan in the study had clearly covered everything, and Ethan sat with the particular deflation of a kid who had gotten what he wanted, attention, and found it tasted worse than expected. After dinner, Emily cleared the plates and finished the kitchen and went upstairs. She was almost at her room when she stopped. Something was on the floor at her doorway. She crouched down. One toy car, dark blue, chrome wheels, placed squarely in the center of the threshold. Not dropped, not left carelessly, but set down with intention, the way you place something when you want the person who finds it to understand it was a choice. She looked down the hallway. Empty. The door to Noah's room was closed. Emily picked up the car and turned it over once in her palm. She thought about what it cost a 10-year-old boy who hadn't offered anything to anyone in 2 years to walk down this hallway in the dark and leave something at her door. She set it on her nightstand where she could see it. The next morning, she found Ethan sitting alone in the kitchen at 6:45, 40 minutes before anyone else was usually up. He had a bowl of dry cereal in front of him and was staring at it like it had personally offended him. Emily poured herself coffee and sat down across the table. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't tell him everything would be okay. She just sat there, and after about a minute and a half, Ethan looked up and said, "Noah only talks to you now. And he doesn't even actually talk. He's figuring out if people are safe," Emily said. "I'm his brother." "I know. That's actually harder." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Safe takes longer to prove to the people who matter most. It's not fair, but that's how it works." Ethan thought about that. He poked at his cereal. "I didn't mean to ruin the mural," he said finally. Emily looked at him. "What did you mean to do?" Long pause. Then, quietly, "I don't know. I just wanted someone to look at me." She nodded slowly. Not with pity, just acknowledgement. "I see you, Ethan," she said. He didn't say anything back, but he stayed at the table and ate his cereal, and that was enough for now. From the hallway, a small figure in blue pajamas stood just outside the kitchen doorway, listening. Neither of them saw him. Noah heard every word. The outing was Michael's idea, which surprised everyone in the house except Emily. She had noticed something about him over the past 6 days that didn't match the version of Michael Brennan that lived in whispered staff conversations and careful silences. The man those stories described was all hard edges and cold calculation. The man she had watched standing in the hallway outside the dining room on the first night, watching his son stack sugar packets with a stranger, had something else entirely behind his eyes. Something that didn't have a name in the language of power and control. He loved his boys, fiercely, quietly, and with the particular helplessness of someone who could solve almost any problem in the world except the ones that mattered most to him. So when he appeared at breakfast on day 6 and said they were going to Navy Pier, early, before the crowds, the twins and Emily and 2 of his men, Emily understood exactly what it was. Not a family outing. An attempt. A father trying to hand his sons one normal morning and hoping it would hold. Ethan received this news like a lottery winner. He had a full itinerary mapped out before the car was even called. Ferris wheel first, then the wave swings, then food, specifically the place near the entrance that did the thick-cut fries with the seasoning. He presented this plan to Emily at the bottom of the stairs with absolute authority, and she accepted it with matching seriousness. Noah came downstairs already dressed, his noise-canceling headphones hanging around his neck. He stood by the front door and waited. No resistance, no hesitation. Emily took that as a good sign. The pier in early morning was a different city. Wide open and salt-smelling. The lake stretched out flat and silver under a pale October sky. Without the afternoon crowds, the whole place felt borrowed, like they had arrived somewhere between one version of the world and the next. Ethan took off at a run the moment they cleared the entrance, drawn straight to the Ferris wheel gondolas swaying gently in the offshore wind. Michael went after him, and for a few minutes Emily watched the 2 of them from a distance. Ethan pointing at things, Michael listening, the faintest loosening in the line of his shoulders. She walked beside Noah. They didn't talk, obviously, but there was a quality to the silence between them now that had changed from the first day. Less like a wall, more like an understanding. Noah walked close enough that his arm occasionally brushed hers, and he looked at things with the careful attention of someone who was allowing himself to be interested in the world again, just in small doses, just within arm's reach of a person he had decided was safe. He stopped at the edge of the lakeside carousel and watched it turn for almost 5 full minutes. Emily stood beside him and watched it too. Neither of them needed to explain why. They covered the pier slowly over the next half hour, the Ferris wheel with Ethan narrating the entire city from the top, a loop through the indoor shops where Noah paused at a display of model ships and studied each one like he was memorizing them, a stop near the South Dock where Michael bought coffee and handed Emily a cup without asking if she wanted one, which she found unexpectedly considerate. By 9:30, it felt like the morning might actually hold together. It didn't. The sound came without warning. An event production crew had been rigging pyrotechnics on the east end of the pier all morning, running a technical rehearsal for a concert that weekend. They had clearance, they had their permits, and what they didn't have was any awareness that a family was standing 40 yards away when they fired the first test charge. The crack hit the air like the sky splitting open. For most people nearby, it was startling. A flinch, a hand to the chest, a short laugh of relief once they understood what it was. For Noah, it was something else entirely. He was gone before Emily fully registered the sound. Not running the way a frightened child runs, panicked, directionless. He moved with the specific, silent speed of someone whose body had made a decision independent of thought, slipping between a family of tourists and disappearing into the covered marketplace before anyone could react. Ethan spun around. "Noah, I've got him." Emily was already moving. She didn't run. She didn't call his name. She moved quickly but without urgency in her body language, because she had learned by now that the energy you bring into the space around Noah is the energy that fills it. Panic invites panic. Calm invites nothing, but nothing was better than worse. She thought about where he would go. Away from sound. Away from open space. Low, sheltered, near water because water was consistent. It didn't change its tone or volume without warning the way voices did. She moved through the marketplace toward the lakeside exit, past the food stalls and the game booths, out through the far door, and onto the quieter stretch of pier that ran alongside the carousel. The morning light off the lake was white and flat. She found him under a bench, knees up, back against the pier railing, arms tight around himself. His headphones were still around his neck. He hadn't had time to get them on. His eyes were open and fixed on the middle distance, which was the particular look he had when the world had gotten too loud inside his own head to track what was happening outside it. Emily sat down on the bench directly above him. Not on the ground beside him this time. Above, giving him his ceiling, his boundary, his contained space. She reached into her jacket pocket. She had packed them that morning without mentioning it to anyone. A pair of foam-padded noise-canceling headphones, smaller than Noah's usual pair, bought 2 days ago from a shop on Michigan Avenue, because she had been thinking about this exact possibility since the moment she found out where they were going. A pier, an event space, an October weekend. She held them out below the bench without leaning down, just extended her hand into his line of sight and held them there. He looked at her hand. He looked at the headphones. He looked at her face, briefly, through the slats of the bench. Then he reached up and took them. He put them on slowly, adjusting the fit with both hands. The moment they settled over his ears, his shoulders dropped half an inch. Not all the way, but half an inch was significant. Half an inch was the difference between a wave that breaks and one that passes. They stayed that way for several minutes. Noah under the bench, Emily above him, the carousel turning beside them in the October quiet. When Michael found them, he stopped at a distance. He stood there and looked at his son sitting calmly beneath a bench on Navy Pier, headphones on, watching the lake, while this woman he had hired 6 days ago sat above him and let the silence be enough. He had spent 2 years and more money than he would say out loud on people with degrees and theories and structured therapeutic frameworks. None of them had thought to pack a spare pair of headphones. He turned that over in his mind the entire drive home. Rain had been falling since before dawn. Not the dramatic, lightning-split kind that sent Noah under tables, just steady and gray and persistent, the kind of rain that settles into a house and makes everything inside feel quieter and further from the world. Emily had woken to the sound of it against her window and decided before she was fully awake that it was a good day to tackle the attic storage project that Glinda had mentioned on her first day and nobody had touched since. She found the attic through a narrow door at the end of the third-floor hallway, behind a linen shelf that swung outward on a hinge. The staircase was steep, and the light at the top was a single bare bulb that swayed slightly in the draft from the rafters. The space itself was enormous. The full footprint of the mansion spread out beneath a low, slanted ceiling, filled with the accumulated weight of a family that had been wealthy for a long time. Covered furniture, stacked boxes, old framed photographs with their faces turned toward the wall. The specific silence of stored things. Emily pulled on the work gloves she'd brought up and started from the left wall, moving methodically. Most of it was straightforward. Holiday decorations, outdated electronics, boxes of books that had probably been boxed and forgotten during some past renovation. She labeled and stacked and worked her way inward. She almost missed the drawings entirely. They were in a box near the back, pushed under a low shelf between a broken floor lamp and 3 rolled canvas paintings. The box itself was unremarkable: brown cardboard, no label, flaps folded closed without tape. She would have moved it into the general stack without opening it, except one flap had come loose, and when she lifted the box, a single sheet of paper slid out and floated to the floor. She picked it up. A child's drawing. Pencil on white paper, the lines careful and small in the way children draw when they're trying to record something exactly rather than express it. A house. A gate. Figures, small and stick simplified but positioned deliberately, each one in a specific place. Emily looked at it for a long moment, then opened the box. There were dozens of them. They varied in medium, pencil, crayon, a few in the thin marker lines of a felt tip running low on ink, but they shared a quality that separated them from ordinary childhood drawings. These weren't imaginative. They weren't fantastical. They were observational. Noah had been drawing what he saw, over and over, with the quiet compulsion of someone trying to work something out that couldn't be reached through words. Most were simple: the mansion from different angles, the lake house dock, Ethan sleeping, a dinner table from floor level, a window with rain on it, the toy car line on the windowsill. Emily sat down on an old covered trunk and went through them slowly, one by one. Then she reached the bottom of the box. The last drawing was different. It was larger than the others, 2 sheets taped carefully together to make a wider frame. The lines were heavier, pressed harder into the paper, like it had been drawn and then redrawn, traced over multiple times to make sure every detail stayed exactly right. It showed the front of the mansion at night, the gate, the driveway, dark shapes that were trees, a sky filled in solid gray with the flat side of a pencil, and figures, several of them near the gate, positioned with the deliberateness of a child who understood that placement mattered, that where someone was standing in the moment you were drawing told the whole story. Most of the figures were nonspecific shapes, but one was different. One figure near the gate was drawn with specificity that the others weren't. Taller, standing slightly apart, and on his wrist, drawn carefully, given more attention than anything else in the picture, a watch. Not just any watch, a distinctive one. The band thick, the face large, and extending from the face a detail that a 10-year-old had clearly considered important enough to press hard into the paper. A small star-shaped marker at the 12th position. Emily stared at it. She had seen that watch. 2 days ago, at the far end of the back corridor on the ground floor, she had passed one of Michael's senior security men, Daniel Reeves, rolling up his sleeve to check the time as he came out of a meeting room. She had noticed the watch the way you notice something without meaning to, a peripheral registration that files itself away without announcement. Thick band, large face, small silver star at the 12th. The exact watch in the drawing. She looked at the figure again. At the gate. At night. At a positioning that placed him not in the path of whatever was happening, not responding to it, but slightly apart, slightly before it, like someone who had been there first, like someone who had let something in. She sat with that understanding settling through her slowly and carefully, the way cold water finds the lowest point. She was still sitting with it when she heard the attic stairs. The footsteps were light and unhurried, the weight of a child who had climbed these stairs before. Emily looked up and Noah appeared at the top of the staircase, stopping when he saw her. His eyes went to her face first, checking, and then dropped to her hands. To the drawing. The change was immediate. His expression didn't collapse into fear. It went somewhere else, somewhere harder and more desperate. The look of someone who has kept a heavy thing hidden for a long time and suddenly sees it in another person's hands. He crossed the attic in 5 fast steps and grabbed the drawing from her. Not violently, not aggressively, but with a grip that said this was not something she was allowed to hold. He pulled it against his chest. Emily didn't reach for it. She didn't speak. She held her hands open at her sides and kept her voice completely level when she said quietly, "Okay, it's yours." Noah looked at her for a long, suspended moment. His chest was moving too fast. His eyes were scanning her face the way they did when he was deciding something. Then he turned and walked back to the stairs without a sound. His footsteps went down, then along the 3rd-floor hallway, Then the sound of his bedroom door closing, not slamming, just closing. Emily sat in the attic and let the rain fill the silence. She thought about what she had seen, about the gate, about the figure, about the watch on her wrist she had stood 3 feet from 2 days ago. She thought about what it meant that Noah had hidden these drawings in a box in an attic rather than shown them to anyone. What it meant that an 8-year-old, because he had been 8 when it happened, had drawn that night over and over and over again for 2 years and never once shown a single person. He hadn't forgotten. He had remembered everything. And somewhere in this house, in the daily machinery of Michael Brennan's world, the man in the drawing was still showing up for work. Emily stood up, pulled off her work gloves, and walked down the attic stairs. She needed to think carefully about what came next. Emily said nothing about the drawing for 4 days. Not because she was uncertain about what she had seen. She was completely certain, and that certainty sat in her chest like something with weight. But certainty and timing were 2 different things, and she had learned a long time ago that the most important part of handling something carefully was knowing when not to move. She watched Daniel Reeves instead, quietly, the way she did everything. He was around the mansion more than the other security men, always present at briefings, always close to Michael's inner circle, trusted in the specific way that takes years to build. He was polite to the staff in the distracted manner of someone who considered politeness a professional courtesy rather than a human one. He had the silver watch on every time she saw him. He never looked at Noah. That last part was what she kept coming back to. The others, the guards, the staff, even the visiting specialists over the years, they looked at Noah. Some with pity, some with professional curiosity, some just with the helpless awareness of a child who was clearly carrying something too heavy. But Daniel Reeves moved through the same rooms as Noah and never once let his eyes land on him. Deliberate avoidance looked different from ordinary indifference. Emily knew the difference. She filed everything away and waited. On the morning of day 12, Michael told them they were going to the lake house. He said it over breakfast in the same way he announced everything, as fact, as plan, as something already decided. Wisconsin, the family property on the water, 2 hours north. A few days away from the city. He was looking at his coffee when he said it, but Emily noticed his eyes move briefly to both boys when he finished, checking the temperature of the room. Ethan immediately wanted to know if there was a kayak. There was, Michael confirmed. Ethan considered this deeply satisfying. Noah looked up from his plate when Michael said lake house. Something shifted in his expression, not excitement exactly, but a loosening, like a word he recognized, like somewhere that had a different set of memories attached to it than the mansion did. Emily packed light. She packed Noah's headphones, a small puzzle she had noticed him eyeing on the shelf in the study, and the particular brand of crackers he ate when he was anxious. She had stopped keeping a list of these things. They had simply become things she knew. The lake house was nothing like the mansion, where the mansion held itself apart from everything around it, walled, gated, deliberately imposing. The lake house sat low and unpretentious at the edge of the water, wooden and weathered, with a wide porch that looked out over the lake and a dock that extended just far enough to make the shore feel optional. Pine trees came close on both sides. The nearest neighbor was half a mile up the waterline and invisible behind the tree cover. Emily stood on the porch the first evening and understood why a child who had spent 2 years inside high walls and hushed corridors would loosen here. The sky was bigger. The rules were quieter. The house smelled like pine sap and old wood rather than cleaning products and formality. By the end of the first full day, the change in Noah was visible enough that even Ethan noticed. He didn't disappear to his room after meals. He sat on the dock with his feet over the edge, watching the way the afternoon light moved across the water. He helped Emily in the kitchen on the second morning without being asked, standing beside her at the counter with focused attention, cracking eggs with the careful deliberateness of someone who found the precision of it satisfying. When she handed him the spatula, he handled it with complete seriousness. The pancakes were slightly uneven on one side. He looked at them with mild displeasure and then ate 4 of them. Ethan fished off the dock every afternoon, with the loud, optimistic energy of someone fully convinced they were about to catch something significant. He caught nothing for 2 full days. Noah eventually came and sat beside him on the 3rd afternoon without invitation, took a rod, and within 20 minutes had caught the first fish of the trip. Ethan's reaction to this, a noise somewhere between admiration and personal outrage, produced the first genuine smile Emily had seen from Noah. Small, and gone almost immediately, but completely real. She was on the porch when it happened. She looked away quickly, like she hadn't seen it, because she understood by now that witness joy was harder for Noah than private joy. He needed to feel things first before he could share them. Board games came out on the second evening. Michael's Choice, which surprised the boys enough that Ethan actually stopped talking for a full 3 seconds when their father sat down at the table and began opening the box. They played for 2 hours. Michael was competitive in a way that clearly delighted Ethan, who matched it loudly and completely. Noah played quietly and won the second round by a margin that nobody quite saw coming. Emily sat across the table and thought, not for the first time, that the four of them around a board game table looked like something that had always been possible and had simply been waiting for the right conditions. It was the third evening that changed everything. The sun had dropped behind the tree line, and the lake had gone the dark, still blue of early evening. Ethan had gone inside after dinner. Michael was sitting at the far end of the dock with a drink and his phone, handling something that couldn't wait even here. Noah and Emily were at the near end of the dock, just sitting. A car came up the gravel driveway. Emily heard it before she saw it. The slow, deliberate sound of tires on loose stone, headlights cutting through the tree line. She turned and watched the dark car pull up beside the house. A man got out. Daniel Reeves. He walked toward the porch with a folder under his arm. Security updates, he would say. Something that needed Michael's attention in person. An excuse solid enough to hold weight. Thin enough to question if you were already questioning him. Emily didn't move. She watched him. And then she looked at Noah. He had gone completely still. Not the ordinary stillness of a child who had stopped what he was doing, the other kind. The particular, total stillness of a body that has recognized something dangerous before the mind has fully processed it. His fishing rod was still in his hands. He wasn't holding it anymore so much as gripping it, both hands wrapped around the handle, knuckles pale against the darkening air. His eyes were fixed on Daniel Reeves' wrist. The silver watch caught the last of the evening light as Daniel raised a hand to knock on the porch door. Noah began to tremble. Emily moved without thinking. She placed herself between Noah and the sight line to the driveway, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Not holding, not restraining, just present. She felt the trembling under her palm and kept her breathing steady and even, because her breathing was the only thing she could give him right now that cost nothing and helped everything. She looked down at him. His eyes moved from the driveway up to her face, then back to her again, like he was deciding which thing to follow, which thing was safe. She held his gaze and gave him the smallest nod, the kind that said, "I see it. I see him. You are not alone in this." Noah looked down at his hands. He set the fishing rod down carefully on the dock planks. And then, very slowly, he leaned sideways until his shoulder was pressed against Emily's arm. Just that. Just the weight of him, small and certain. She didn't move away. She stood completely still and let him stay there until Daniel Reeves had gone inside, and the driveway was dark again, and the lake had returned to its quiet. For days. That was how long she had been waiting for the right moment. She was done waiting. She didn't get the chance to say anything that night. By the time Daniel Reeves finished with Michael and drove back down the gravel road, it was past 9 o'clock and the boys were already inside. Michael came to find Emily on the dock shortly after, not to talk about Daniel, but to tell her they were heading back to Chicago in the morning. Something had come up, the way things always came up in his world, quietly and without explanation. Emily nodded and said goodnight. She lay in her room at the lake house and thought about timing. About how you approached a man like Michael Brennan with information that implicated someone inside his own circle. She didn't know yet, but she was working on it. And she had decided one thing clearly. She needed to be certain before she said a word. Not almost certain. Certain. Because a wrong step in that direction had consequences she wasn't willing to create. She would wait for the right opening. What she didn't account for was Ethan. The drive back to Chicago cut through Milwaukee, and somewhere on the highway Ethan spotted the signs for the street festival, banners stretched between lamp posts, hand-painted arrows pointing toward blocked-off roads, the distant sound of a brass band carrying over the rooftops. He turned to his father in the front seat with the full force of his personality aimed in one direction. 20 minutes later, they were parked. It wasn't part of the plan. Michael had things to return to and a schedule that didn't include street festivals. But there was something about the way Ethan had looked at those banners, not just excited, but hungry for it. The specific hunger of a kid who had spent 2 years in a house that held its breath, that apparently reached something in his father that schedules didn't. They walked in as a group. Michael's 2 security men spread out on either side with the practiced ease of people who could make watchfulness look like casual strolling. The festival ran for 6 blocks, food stalls and game booths, and a main stage at the far end where a band was setting up, the brass section warming up with loose, wandering notes that bounced off the building fronts and mixed with the smell of fried dough and kettle corn. Ethan was in his natural environment. He moved through the crowd with the frictionless confidence of a child who had never once considered that a space might not want him in it, pointing at things, pulling Michael toward a ring-toss stall, negotiating loudly for a stick of grilled corn. Emily walked beside Noah, who had his headphones on and was managing the crowd in the careful, controlled way he had developed, staying close, keeping his eyes moving, touching the sleeve of her jacket occasionally when something came too close or too loud. For the first 40 minutes, it was fine. Better than fine. Michael actually laughed twice, once at something Ethan said and once at the ring toss, when Ethan landed 3 in a row and immediately claimed it was skill rather than luck with a confidence that left no room for debate. Emily noticed Noah watching his father laugh, storing it. Then she noticed Noah watching something else, the way every adult in their group had angled toward Ethan without meaning to. The way it had happened again, naturally, and without anyone deciding it. The gravitational pull of the easier child drawing all the attention while the quieter one stood at the edge of the frame. She turned to say something to Noah. He was watching her, and behind his eyes was something she recognized with a small drop in her stomach. Not his pain, but his brother's. The look of a child who understood, on some level, exactly what Ethan was feeling, who had watched his twin spend 2 years being the capable one, the functional one, the one who was fine, and understood that fine was its own kind of invisible. She was still processing that when Michael's security man touched his earpiece and turned sharply. "Ethan," he said. Michael looked left, looked right. The stall where Ethan had been standing 1 minute ago was just a stall now, with strangers in front of it, and no 10-year-old boy in a red jacket anywhere in the immediate frame. The shift in Michael's expression was instantaneous. Not panic, because men like him had trained panic out of themselves, but something harder and more controlled that lived in the same place panic did. He spoke quietly into his phone. His security men began moving outward through the crowd in opposite directions. Emily looked at Noah. He wasn't frozen. That was the first thing. The second thing was that he was already looking at the crowd with a focused, scanning expression she had never seen on him before. Not overwhelmed, not retreating, but sharp. Present. Like something had turned on behind his eyes that the noise and the crowd and the chaos hadn't been able to reach until exactly this moment. He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small basketball keychain. Orange, battered, the kind won at a fairground game rather than bought. Ethan's. Emily had seen it hanging from Ethan's bag strap for weeks. She had no idea how Noah came to have it in his pocket, but she suspected he had carried it the way he carried certain objects, not as something borrowed, but as something kept close. Noah looked at the keychain. Then he looked at the festival layout around them, the food stalls, the game section, the main stage at the far end. He stood completely still for about 4 seconds, thinking in whatever language Noah thought in, working through something methodical and private. Then he started walking. Not running, not hesitating, walking with a direction that was unmistakable. Emily went with him without question. She had learned by now that when Noah moved with intention, you followed. He went past the food stalls without stopping, past the ring toss, past a row of brightly lit game booths that strobed enough to make Emily blink. He turned down a side section of the festival that ran parallel to the main drag, quieter, less crowded, the booths giving way to scattered seating, and a smaller stage at the end where a single musician was playing something slow and acoustic. And there, sitting on a low concrete barrier near the front of the stage with his red jacket clearly visible and his elbows on his knees, and the expression of someone who had made a decision and immediately wished they hadn't, was Ethan. Noah stopped 2 feet away from his brother. Ethan looked up. His eyes moved from Noah to Emily and back to Noah. The prepared excuse that was clearly already assembled behind his expression fell apart completely under the weight of his brother standing in front of him. Noah, who never came toward anything, who let the world come to him, who had just walked through a crowded Milwaukee street festival without headphones to find him. Ethan's chin went down. "I didn't think anyone would notice," he said. His voice was small in a way it almost never was. Noah looked at him for a long moment. Then he sat down on the barrier beside his brother, close enough that their shoulders touched, and he stayed there. No lecture, no relief performed for an audience. Just presence, which was the only language Noah had, and also, it turned out, the exact right one. Emily stepped back and called Michael. She kept her eyes on the two boys sitting side by side at the edge of a music stage at a festival in Milwaukee. Ethan staring at the ground, Noah looking straight ahead, shoulders pressed together, and something moved in her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. She found one eventually. It was hope. 3 days after Milwaukee, the storm came back. Not the same storm. Chicago in late October didn't work that way. But the same quality of sky, the same pressure dropping through the afternoon, the same particular shade of dark green that settled over the city in the hour before everything broke open. Emily had learned to watch for it. She kept Noah's headphones within reach, made sure the dining room had soft lighting before dinner, made sure the evening moved slowly enough that he had time to register changes before they happened. She was learning to read the weather the way she read him. Dinner passed without incident. Ethan dominated the conversation with a detailed account of something that had happened at school involving a substitute teacher, a broken projector, and a sequence of events that became increasingly improbable as the story went on. Michael listened with one eyebrow raised and the expression of a man who was 90% certain his son was embellishing but had no way to prove it. Noah ate steadily and watched his brother with the quiet attention he gave everything. It was after dinner that the power went out. Not dramatically, no crack of lightning, no movie moment darkness. Just a flicker, a soft click from somewhere in the walls. And then the whole house settled into the kind of dark that large old houses do when every light disappears at once. The generator was supposed to kick in within 20 seconds. For reasons that the property manager would spend the following morning apologizing for at length, it took 4 minutes. 4 minutes was a long time. Emily was in the hallway when it happened. She had her phone out for light within seconds, moving toward the home theater room where she had last seen Noah. Because Noah and sudden darkness were a combination she was not willing to leave unattended. She found him already inside the theater. He had gone there on his own, either because it was the nearest room or because something in the dark had pulled him toward the place where the family kept its photographs and its old recorded footage, the home theater that Michael never used for films anymore, but sometimes sat in alone late at night. Emily had noticed that detail early on and filed it away without comment. The emergency backup on the projection system had triggered automatically, running on its own small battery reserve. The screen at the front of the theater was cycling through a saved slideshow, family photographs projected large and soft in the darkroom, one after another on a slow automated timer. Birthday parties, lake house summers, Christmas mornings. The boys at various ages, smaller and smaller as the slideshow cycled backward through time. Noah was sitting in the front row, 3 feet from the screen. He wasn't in distress. Not yet. He was just watching the photographs move across the wall in front of him with an expression Emily couldn't fully read from the doorway. Somewhere between memory and the place before memory, the place where things live that the mind knows but the body hasn't processed. She came in quietly and sat 2 seats down from him. The photographs kept changing. She watched them with him. The twins at maybe 7, gap-toothed and laughing on the dock at the lake house. A birthday cake with too many candles. Michael and a woman Emily had never seen, dark-haired, with Noah's eyes and Ethan's mouth, sitting on the porch at the lake house with a boy on each side. The 4 of them caught in a moment of complete and ordinary happiness that hurt to look at because of everything it had become. Their mother. Emily kept her eyes forward and her breathing even. The slideshow slowed. The photographs grew older. The boys shrank. And then the cycle reached its furthest point and paused. A single image held on the screen for the 3-second interval before it would loop back to the beginning. It was a photograph of the front of the mansion at night. A party of some kind. Lights strung along the driveway. Cars parked in the turning circle. Figures in formal clothes visible near the entrance. A normal, celebratory photograph of a house that still believed itself to be safe. Noah's hands came down on the armrests of his seat. Emily watched him without turning her head. He was looking at the photograph with the same focused, pressing attention he had given the drawings in the attic. Not watching it, but examining it, searching it, moving through it the way you move through a place you recognize from a dream. His breathing changed. Not panic, something more complicated than panic. The specific quality of someone standing at the edge of something they have been approaching for a very long time. His knuckle began tapping on the armrest. Fast. The uneven rhythm. The one that meant the inside was too loud. Emily turned to face him fully and said, quietly, "I'm here. You're safe." He looked at her, then back at the screen. His mouth opened. Nothing came out for a moment. Just the shape of sound, the physical attempt without the arrival. Emily sat completely still. She did not lean forward. She did not encourage or prompt or ask. She had learned that words pushed toward Noah bounced off him, but words that came from him needed a clear path with nothing in the way. She waited. When it came, it was barely a whisper, broken into fragments, the way something sounds when it has been held underwater for 2 years and is only now being allowed to the surface. "Gate," he stopped. Swallowed. "Open." Emily's pulse moved. "Silver watch." The 3 words sat in the dark theater like something physical, small and enormous at the same time. Noah looked at the photograph on the screen, the party, the driveway, the people near the entrance, and then he looked at his own hands in his lap, and the expression on his face was the expression of someone who has finally put down something that was always too heavy for them to carry and doesn't yet know what to do with their empty hands. Emily reached over and placed her hand over his. Light. Just resting there. He didn't pull away. From the doorway of the theater, in the dark of the hallway beyond, a figure stood very still. Michael Brennan had come looking for his son with a flashlight and found more than he was prepared for. He stood in the doorway and heard the 3 words come out of the child who had not produced a single one in 2 years, and the flashlight in his hand lowered slowly until it was pointing at the floor. "Gate. Open." Silver watch. He was not a man who needed things explained to him at length. He had built a life on connecting pieces of information quickly and accurately, on understanding what a detail meant in the broader picture before anyone else in the room got there. He stood in the dark doorway, and the pieces moved into place with a quiet, terrible certainty. He had trusted Daniel Reeves for 11 years. He had given him access to everything. He stepped back from the doorway before Noah could see him. He stood in the dark hallway with his back against the wall and his hand pressed flat against it. And he stayed there for a long time, long after the power came back on, and the house returned to light and sound and the ordinary noise of an evening resuming. He stayed there because he needed a moment that nobody else could see. Then he straightened up, put the flashlight in his pocket, and walked downstairs to his study. He had phone calls to make, and he knew exactly where to start. Michael said nothing about what he had heard for 3 days. Emily noticed the change in him the way she noticed most things, quietly, from a slight distance, without drawing attention to the fact that she was noticing it all. He was present in the house in a different way than before. Less occupied. He appeared at breakfast instead of having it brought to his study. He asked Ethan questions about school that required actual answers rather than the kind of questions that could be deflected with a yes or no. He watched Noah, not with the helpless, aching quality of before, but with something more alert, like a man who had been given new information and was reorganizing everything he knew around it. He was building something. She could tell. He didn't confide in her, and she didn't expect him to. She simply continued doing what she had been doing, managing the house, managing the mornings, protecting the fragile and genuine progress that Noah was making in the quiet way progress sometimes moves, not in sudden leaps, but in the accumulation of small things that one day add up to different. Noah had not spoken again after the theater. 3 words were 3 words. She wasn't going to put a ceiling on what they meant or a timeline on what came next. She just made sure the path stayed clear. Daniel Reeves came to the mansion once during those 3 days. Emily watched Michael receive him in the front hallway with the same composed, unrevealing expression he brought to everything. Nobody looking at that interaction would have seen anything shift. She almost admired it, the particular discipline of a man who could stand in front of someone he suspected of betrayal and give nothing away. Almost. The gala was on the evening of day 20. The Chicago History Museum on a charity fundraising night was a specific kind of spectacle. The building opened up and made available for the city's wealthy to circulate through, the permanent exhibits serving as backdrop to conversations about money and influence dressed up in the language of philanthropy. Michael attended it every year. His name was on a plaque somewhere in the East Wing. He told Emily 2 days in advance that she would be coming. Not asked, told, in the way he communicated things he considered logistical. The twins were attending also, a public appearance decision she suspected had more layers to it than a desire to show his children a history exhibit. She packed Noah's small emergency kit, headphones, crackers, a folded piece of blank paper, and a short pencil she had started carrying for him because she had noticed drawing helped him regulate in spaces where tapping would draw attention. The museum at night was dramatic in the way old stone buildings are when lit from below, all shadow and golden light. The entrance flanked by people in formal clothes who all seemed to know each other with the practiced intimacy of a world that didn't require introductions. Michael moved through it with the ease of someone who had been moving through rooms like this his whole adult life. Ethan was immediately fascinated by the exhibits. He stationed himself in front of a large Civil War diorama and began a detailed analysis of the tactical decisions involved to anyone nearby willing to engage with him. A patient museum docent found herself recruited into this conversation within 4 minutes. Noah stayed close to Emily. He had his headphones around his neck, and his expression was the careful, processing one he wore in large spaces, taking everything in without reacting to any of it, filing and sorting. He was managing well, better than she had expected. An hour into the evening, Michael was pulled into conversation near the main hall by 2 trustees who required his attention with the specific insistence of people who had donated large amounts of money. Emily drifted with Noah toward the quieter south corridor, away from the concentrated noise of the reception, toward a set of glass doors that opened onto the museum courtyard. Noah stopped. His hand found Emily's arm, not distress, not fear. The directional grip. The one he used when he needed her to look at something specific. She followed his eyeline. The courtyard was partially lit, a low ambient glow from the garden fixtures that left the far corners in relative shadow. 3 men stood near the far hedge, not together in the way guests stood together, not with drinks and the loose body language of a social conversation. Close and deliberate, the posture of a meeting. 2 of them she didn't recognize. The third had his back to the courtyard entrance, but the set of his shoulders and the thick-banded watch on his wrist visible even from here were specific enough to identify without a face. Daniel Reeves. He had something in his hand, a phone, held flat between himself and the man across from him, the screen angled inward. Not showing something casually, transferring something. The interaction had a 10-second window before Daniel pocketed the phone and the 3 men shifted into a more casual arrangement. But that window was exactly long enough. Noah was already pulling her. He moved back through the south corridor at a pace that was just below a run, purposeful and direct, back toward the main hall with Emily's hand held in both of his. She went with him, scanning for Michael as they moved, spotting him still at the far end of the hall where the trustees had him pinned against a column with the determined energy of people who build by the hour. Noah stopped at the nearest standing table. He let go of Emily's hand, and she understood immediately. She reached into her bag and produced the folded paper and the pencil. He drew quickly, not the careful, deliberate drawing of the attic. This was fast and functional, the sketch of someone communicating rather than recording. The courtyard, blocked in roughly with a few lines. 3 figures. The phone held flat. An arrow between the 2 figures to indicate the transfer. Then, alongside the figures, a detail that didn't need explanation. A watch. Thick band. Star at the 12. He handed the paper to Emily. She looked at it for 1 second, and then walked directly to Michael and placed it on the column ledge beside him mid-sentence without apology. Michael glanced down. His expression didn't change in any way visible to the trustees beside him. He reached over, folded the paper once, and placed it in his jacket pocket. Then he excused himself from the conversation with the smooth brevity of a man who had been excusing himself from conversations his entire life. He crossed the main hall, spoke quietly to one of his men for 30 seconds, and then walked toward the south corridor without looking back. Emily stood at the edge of the hall with Noah beside her. What happened in the next 40 minutes happened quietly and entirely out of sight. She heard none of it and saw none of it, and Michael offered no description afterward. What she did learn, in the days that followed, came in pieces, from Glinda, who heard things, and from one careful conversation with Michael himself on the back porch 3 mornings later. Daniel had been given a private room somewhere in the museum's administrative wing. Michael had come in with enough documented evidence, gathered over the 3 days following the theater, that the conversation had very little room for maneuvering. Phone records. Access logs from the night of the attack 2 years ago. The timeline laid out with the patience of a man who had waited long enough to be certain before he moved. Daniel admitted it. Not immediately, not without resistance, but eventually. The money, the access information he had passed along, the gate left open at the precise window that allowed entry. He had told himself at the time that nobody was supposed to get hurt. He had believed the story he was sold. He had spent 2 years telling himself it wasn't what it was. He was removed from Michael's organization that same night. Quietly, completely, without a mark on him. Emily only found out that last part from Glinda, who said it with a particular significance, as though the absence of violence was itself a statement about something. She thought it probably was. She was standing in the museum foyer waiting for the car when she felt a small weight settle against her arm. She looked down. Noah was leaning on her the same way he had on the dock at the lake house. Shoulder to shoulder. Steady and certain. He was looking across the foyer at his father, who had just reappeared at the entrance of the south corridor and was straightening his jacket with the contained, deliberate movement of a man who had just finished something difficult and necessary. Michael looked up and his eyes found his son across the crowded room. Something passed between them that Emily had no word for. She didn't need one. She just stood there and held her ground, a point between father and son that both of them could find their way back from, and let the moment be whatever it needed to be. Section 9. The first full sentence. Colorado mountain cabin 1 month later. Chicago let them go without a fight. Michael made the decision on a Tuesday morning, which Emily knew because she heard him on the phone in the study the night before, canceling 3 weeks of obligations with the tone of a man who had stopped asking the world's permission for things. Colorado. The family cabin in the mountains outside Aspen, closed up since the previous winter. He told the boys at breakfast. Ethan asked if there would be snow. There would be snow. That was the end of the discussion. The drive to the airport and the short flight and the rental car that took them up through the mountain roads felt different from every other trip Emily had taken with this family. Less managed. Less watched. Michael sat in the front seat of the rental with his jacket off and his phone face down in the center console, which she had never seen before, and he pointed out things through the windshield. A frozen creek running alongside the road, a ridge of pine trees against the white sky, with the unhurried attention of someone who had decided to be present rather than simply located somewhere. Ethan talked the entire drive. Noah watched the mountains through the window with his forehead resting against the glass, and somewhere in the last 20 minutes of the road, when the trees thickened and the altitude shifted the light into something colder and cleaner, he closed his eyes. Not from distress. Emily checked. Just from the particular piece of being in motion toward somewhere good. She turned back to her own window and let him sleep. The cabin was the kind of place that made you understand why people came to mountains. Low and wide, built from dark timber with a stone fireplace that ran floor to ceiling at the far end of the main room. Snow was already packed deep around the base of the walls and hanging in thick shelves from the roof edge. The nearest other structure was a maintenance lodge half a mile down the trail that they never saw anyone come or go from during the entire stay. Above the cabin, the mountain went up into cloud. Below it, a valley opened into a view so large and uncomplicated that standing at the window and looking at it had the effect of putting problems into proportion. The boys disappeared into the snow within 30 minutes of arriving. Emily watched from the porch as Ethan immediately began engineering a fort with the focused ambition of a general who had been waiting for exactly this terrain. Noah stood in the open snow for a moment. Just standing, face tilted up, eyes closed, and then without any visible decision began packing snow beside his brother. She went inside to unpack and left them to it. The days settled into a rhythm that required very little managing. Mornings were slow, fires lit before the boys woke up, coffee and whatever breakfast became collaborative in the way meals in the cabin always did, everyone moving around the small kitchen at the same time. Nobody performing normalcy, because it had stopped being a performance. Ethan burned the toast twice, and both times blamed the altitude with such conviction that by the third morning Michael started agreeing with him just to see where it went. Noah made eggs. He had been practicing since the lake house, and by Colorado he had it down. Focused, deliberate, the same careful attention he brought to everything he considered worth getting right. He slid them onto plates without being asked and returned to the counter to clean up in the same motion, and the ordinariness of it, the simple, daily ordinariness of a child making eggs in a kitchen, was its own kind of extraordinary. Afternoons were the mountains. Snow forts that became snow cities. A sledding run down the gentler slope behind the cabin that Ethan declared the greatest discovery in human history, and that Noah went down 11 times on the second day without once suggesting they stop. Michael went down it twice, which Ethan documented with his phone as evidence of a historical event. Evenings came early in the mountains. By 4 o'clock the light was already going amber and low, and by 5 the fire was the main light in the cabin, and the four of them collected around it with the unconscious ease of people who had stopped needing a reason to be in the same room. The puzzle had been on the coffee table since the second day. Emily had found it in the cabin's storage cabinet. A 1,000-piece landscape, the kind designed to be genuinely difficult, all gradations of blue and gray and white that blurred together and resisted easy sorting. She had put it on the table without comment, knowing that Noah would come to it when he was ready and not before. He circled it for 2 days, studying it from a passing angle, occasionally standing over it when he thought no one was watching, turning a piece over in his fingers and setting it back down without committing. On the third evening, he sat down in front of it. Emily came and sat across from him. She didn't ask if he wanted help. She just picked up a piece and began looking for its place, and he watched her for a moment and then began doing the same. They worked for an hour while Ethan and Michael played cards at the kitchen table behind them, Ethan's running commentary on his own hand creating a warm, formless noise in the background that neither puzzle worker found disruptive. The fire moved. The mountain outside went from gray to black. The puzzle came together in sections, the sky first, then the dark tree line, then the frozen lake in the middle ground, each piece clicking into place with the particular satisfaction of something finding where it belongs. The last section was the hardest, a stretch of flat white snow in the foreground that looked identical across 20 pieces, each one a nearly featureless variation of the same tone. They had avoided it until everything else was complete. They worked through it together slowly, piece by piece, testing and adjusting. The two of them at the edges of the remaining gap, while it shrank from 20 spaces to 10 to 5 to 2. Noah placed the second-to-last piece. Emily picked up the final one, turned it in her fingers, and set it in front of him. He looked at it, then at the empty space. Then he pressed it into place with both thumbs, carefully, the way he did everything that mattered, and the puzzle was complete. The fire popped softly in the grate. Noah sat back and looked at the finished image for a long moment. His hands rested in his lap. His breathing was the easy, unlabored breathing of someone who was simply and fully at rest. Then he turned and looked at Emily. He looked at her the way he looked at things he was trying to record accurately, carefully, completely, as though he wanted to get it exactly right. When he spoke, his voice was low and slightly unsteady with the effort of it, like a door being opened that hadn't been opened in a long time, the hinges finding their movement again slowly. "You stayed," he said. He paused. When everyone else left. 6 words. One complete thought. 2 years of silence and the weight of everything in between, compressed into the simplest possible sentence, because the simplest possible sentence was the truest one. Emily didn't respond immediately. She let the words be there, fully, without rushing to cover them with a reaction. Then she looked at him steadily and said, "I wasn't going anywhere." From the kitchen table, the card game had gone quiet. She didn't turn around to check. She didn't need to. She could feel it, the particular quality of a room when everyone in it has stopped breathing at the same moment, not from shock, but from recognition. The feeling of something arriving that was always coming and is finally here. Ethan's chair scraped softly against the floor. Then stillness. Michael said nothing. Men like him often communicated most clearly when they said nothing, and the silence he was holding right now was the loudest thing in the room. full of 2 years and 3 words in a dark theater and a silver watch in a drawing, and every morning he had stood outside his son's door without knowing how to knock. Noah turned back to the completed puzzle. He looked at it with the expression Emily had been watching develop across 12 days and 1 month and a handful of quiet moments that had added up to this. Not fixed, not finished, not the erasure of anything that had happened, but something real and forward-facing. Something that looked, for the first time in a very long time, like the beginning of okay. The fire settled in the grate. The mountain held its quiet outside the windows, and the 4 of them stayed where they were, in the warm light of a cabin in the Colorado snow. Not because there was nowhere else to be, but because there was nowhere else any of them would rather have been.